Hi, welcome to the Afterlife exhibit at the East Hawaii Cultural Center. I'm Larry Butler, hosting interviews with most of the artists who kindly have agreed to talk about their work in the show. The show was curated by Andrzej Kramarz, who is also our filmmaker here. And my first artist today is Daniel Sheinfeld Rodriguez. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us about your work.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Let me introduce you a little bit. You are trained as an architect and industrial designer, and you seem to have a very broad range of media at your fingertips.
Yeah.
In fact, on your fingertip, look at that, a piece of jewelry.
Yeah, I have one of my rings.
Oh, look at that, looking a lot like sculptures that you had at your last show here.
Yeah,
At
remains.
the EHCC. Wood. The wood stuff is amazing. Let's take a look at your first piece here.
Sure.
How would you talk about it? I'll ask you first.
Well, this piece is called Void. It's the second of a series where I've been exploring using mundane construction materials. So again, with my background in architecture, there's a huge influence on construction materials, structural wood beams in this case. The proportions of the 6x6 that is found in Home Depot or any construction store becomes my material. So in essence, what I'm trying to accomplish here is understand the wood as my medium, understand the language that it has to offer, and figure out ways that are unusual to create. In this case, I burn and destroy the wood in order to create the sculptors. So without typical intervention of any other wood sculptor, which is carving and chiseling, and it's a voluntary way of morphing the piece into whether it's an emotion or a feeling. I leave a chance to make the piece. So the beautiful aspect of it to me is the fact that you don't know what you're gonna get, and it's all done through reduction. So I'm not adding anything to the piece, I'm actually removing. And the fact that it's being removed is what gives sense to the piece. In this case, the name is Void. It's the little portals that are formed that gives the sense to the piece. So what I do is I grab the wood pieces and I apply wood ambers or charcoal to burn and slowly penetrate to the piece. It's a process that takes about 12 hours, and I do it up till it's nighttime, so you see the orange of the ambers burning through the piece. So slowly consuming the wood, and I like to see it as melting the wood, which is a process that you would never expect when it comes to wood. So that's part of my obsession, is finding new ways or different ways to intervene the materials that I use, understand their language, and try to explore and exploit their maximum potential. And another part of it is that these mundane materials or these mundane elements as construction beams are put together and give new meaning. I'm obsessed as well to find the life of the sculptors. Like, I don't finish it until they become alive, and each one of them I kind of try to find how can I introduce the soul to the piece. And there's a moment where they start like pretty much talking to me, and that's when I know it's done. But that's to give you an idea of how it works. And I also leave all the imperfection in the piece. I'm not trying to polish or sanding the piece, like marks of the glue or any accident, like marks of when I step on the piece or anything like that is always welcome. That's part of the chance.
All right. That's awfully interesting. So this is just charcoal burning through.
Yes, so if you see also the back side of the piece has a different sense. So this is, yeah, this is where I actually start the burning part.
Oh, I see the working marks here.
Yeah, so I kind of like make where I want to create these portals. And what happens is that when the ambers reach the floor and the floor sustain the amber, there's a burning that happens between the contact of the wood and the floor. So that's why the result on this side is very different from this one. This one's more control, and this one is you don't know how far it's gonna burn. So it's always like I have to be very careful as to how much I remove and keep the structural integrity of the piece. And that's part of the excitement, that's part of the...
So this is about 1 day's worth of action through the charcoal.
Yeah, so the piece takes a lot of time to think about, but the moment of execution is an incredible amount of physical work and just 1 day of full work.
I have to wonder, is there any ritual component to this?
Definitely. So the element of totems. So totems are seen in different cultures, this connection to a spiritual realm or represent a symbol of a caste or a family or a tribe. And in this sense, the proportions, the totemic proportions of the sculpture also evoke this contemporary version of a totem or my own totem. It's like a symbol of my own caste or my own lineage in a way. So yeah, definitely there's that aspect of it.
Is there any autobiography in this?
Autobiography,
like
yeah,
a house
definitely.
burned down or anything?
Yeah, no, definitely. This is very autobiographic. It's expressed really well. Emotional process that I've been going through, and the void aspect of it is like it's a huge part of how I've been feeling and my struggles and all the things that I've been going through. So this is kind of like a really good representation of that emotional state, and a good way for me to deal with it and transform it into something beautiful.
Is this a one-off, or have you got a series like this?
Yeah, so this is the second one, and I'm creating a series. Like each one has a different type of portal or different type of void or element, but all of them consist in these totemic sculptures that get intervened through these void excavations.
Phrase that's going through my mind is abstract expressionist. Is that fair?
It could be considered in a way, but I see it more as a process sculptor. So like the end result is irrelevant. It's all about like how do I get there, and the experimentation and the exploration of.
I see. You describe yourself as a process artist. And so, again, the idea there in general is...
Yeah, that's that basically like a visual artist, a plastic artist, or any artist that their intention specifically, especially in sculpture, is to create the final product and something beautiful, something visually appealing. Sometimes it's charged with conceptual meaning, but for me the end result is irrelevant. Like for me it's all about that exploration, that experimentation, that understanding of the material and the medium, and how I live part of myself in the piece at the end of the process. So whatever happens, I have no control, but that's not my goal. My goal is to enjoy the process, immerse myself into the fabrication of the piece, and see what happens. That play, that childlike exploration, that's what it's meaningful to me.
That's fascinating. Let's take a look at your other piece here on the show. And in passing, I have to note that this beautiful bench facing the piece is also a work of yours that you kindly donated to the gallery last year.
Yeah, it's a gift for the gallery for Mosacoa. And yeah, I just love the fact that it's such a simple block of wood, sand, and with its beautiful wheels, and it gives us some character.
Yeah, we get compliments on this all the time.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I was very happy with it.
Now there's this dramatic piece here, which is the biggest thing in the show. And again, we're dealing with fire and charcoal.
Yeah, so this one is called Silence. And it came from a poem that I wrote. It's being going through like difficult heartbreak and sense of loss, having to deal with grief. And this is a very, very strong piece that actually the first time that I saw it together was here at the exhibition. I had to do it in different parts, and when I saw it standing, it really moved me, and I mean, I even cry a little. So yeah, it's a very, very personal piece, and a sign of transformation, inner transformation for me. So it's a very, very real piece to me.
How much is it planned? You have 4 different panels. Did you kind of sketch it out in your mind first, how they go together, or was this accident?
No, it's all very accidental, you could say. I don't plan it. I place the panels, and I first wrote a poem many times, and this poem is very personal and very, very strong poem. And my plan was to somehow use this piece as a cathartic process to transform the words contained in this poem and burn them away to achieve some sort of change. But when it comes to planning the piece, this piece was done mainly at night, so visibility is very limited. So actually it's part of the joy, not knowing exactly how deep the charcoals are gonna burn. But what I do is I heat embers of coal, and I place them in the surface of each one of the panels, and they slowly start melting the wood. So the difference of torching the wood is that when you torch the wood, like in the Japanese technique, it only goes up to the surface of the wood. When you do it this way with the embers, they start melting and slowly penetrating the plywood. And if you see the plywood, it has this inner structure of the veneers that are like, if you see each veneer, it's in some sort of grid where one is vertical and one is horizontal. That's what gives the plywood the structural integrity. And the embers of coal, as they start penetrating, they start revealing the inner beauty of the plywood, which it's accidental as well. Sometimes bends the wood, sometimes creates these holes, and sometimes you just see the perfect grid of the plywood and create some sort of language. It's almost like a scripture to me, or like a music partiture in a way.
I see. We have a poem printed in our handout here. Is this the appropriate one?
Yeah, so the poem, it's Silence. The slender scythe with its polished curves never seemed so enticing, so welcoming. Perhaps if I can't speak anymore, you start listening. So these words are
Thank you.
very strong and very personal. It was in a time where I felt like really found myself in a very dark place, and I needed to transform that emotion and make it into something different. So when I burned it away, it was a way to say that it's enough burning. It's time to remove the coals. So that's kind of how from that emotional space I'm able to transform into something that is actually awe-inspiring and beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And then one last thing is in this one, talking as well with a ritualistic element, there's this graphite powder that I also kind of blow into the piece. So somehow it's kind of like the only additive process.
Does that make it flame up?
Yeah, no, it's just like it's also a chance of a splatter type of thing, and gives like another layer into the surface, and it's kind of part of that, like the Yanomami tribes in Venezuela, when they blow the powder to the shamans to connect to the spiritual realm. In a way, I was blowing my soul into the piece, and that's kind of like ways for me to mark another layer into the surface.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And Venezuela is where you were born and raised.
Yeah, I'm originally from Venezuela, yeah.
That's fascinating. Well, thank you so much. That adds so much to our understanding of it all.
Yeah.
My guest now is a prominent local sculptor, Henry Bianchini, who did these 3 very beautiful wood sculptures that are part of this afterlife show. And thank you so much for coming and talking with us about them.
Thank you.
I think most of us on the Big Island would associate you with bronze. So these are a little bit of a surprise. Maybe you could tell us how and when you were doing wood sculpture. Maybe you still are.
I do dive back into wood carving. I consider myself essentially a carver.
Okay.
Everything I do in paintings and bronze or any material I work in comes from a kind of philosophy that Michelangelo talked about, and that is it's in the material already, and you just want to get rid of what you don't want. And so it's a philosophy of reductive. So I approach everything I do from a reductive attitude.
Including bronze?
Yes, because
Really?
with bronze you work in wax, and
Okay.
you're carving there also.
Of course.
So in any material, yeah, it's reductive. Of course you got to add,
Sure.
but then you would subtract. And that's the essential part.
So now with something like this is a complex form. Do you start with a maquette or do you just go straight at it?
In both of these cases, I go straight at it. And sometimes I've started with sketches, but this is a series that I did in Ohana family groups because I was having children at this time. Let me look at the dates here for a minute. This one is 86. So this is 1986, and these are the early 90s. And so at this time, I started casting my own bronzes in 84. So I was doing a lot of series of family groups.
I see.
Ohanas. So what I was talking to you about earlier is when I went to the tiki carvers and watched them work, my idea was to find an equivalent that I could work in modern terms and incorporate the Hawaiian aesthetic. And so I was trying to bring those together. And sometimes you'll be able to see the Hawaiian thing if you think about tikis. Tikis are the religious pieces at the City of Refuge in Kona. And but I'm trying to come from an African and a modernist aesthetic.
Of course, the modernists themselves would acknowledge the African
Absolutely.
aspect of their work. And certainly this is striking. When I first saw it, my first thought was, oh my goodness, West African Dogon, twin figures, family figures.
Yeah. Yeah, the Africans are a very big influence because of the way they worked. As a tribe, they had their artists, the same kind of culture that we have. That we have society and then the artists. And the artists are depicting how the culture is affecting them. And they have their individual way of approaching that. And the modernists in Europe recognized that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a jump away from Impressionism and so forth.
Mm-hmm. I noticed you've done a little bit of
Pigment.
the black increasing the contrast.
Yeah.
That's very handsome.
I've done that once in a while.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I like the deep shadows and I like to enhance them.
Let's take a look at this piece.
Yeah.
And how would you describe it?
Well, it's figurative.
Okay.
And then I take liberties, and I don't ask myself much about those liberties while they're happening. I have a visual sense of things,
Mm-hmm.
and I just follow that vision, and I can move very quickly. And this developed. And so it doesn't come from any preconceived idea. It's in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Now you're working with a chisel and a mallet.
Yeah, a gouge.
Mm-hmm.
I start, using a gouge, a deep gouge. I can move material real fast with a gouge, going across the grain.
Mm-hmm.
And I come in with power tools later in the sanding and smoothing out.
I see. Now I understand that all three of these are in ohia wood.
No, that's the only ohia.
Oh, that's the only ohia. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. What is this?
This is silver oak.
Oh, okay.
They grow down in Ka'u, the big yellow flowered tree.
Ah, all
If you're
right.
driving down there, you'll see that. Now, a lot of carvers or a lot of turners stayed away from silver oak because it's got a toxin in it,
Oh, I see.
and they created allergic reactions to that, itching skin, and their breathing. But it didn't bother me.
Mango does that too, doesn't it?
Mango can do that for some people. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've stayed away from mango because of the color contrast in it. I like materials that aren't distracted by color.
Mm-hmm. It almost has a bronze quality to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, that one does. Yeah.
It does, very much so.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. And then this one here, this is also
That's also silver oak.
silver oak.
Yeah.
And again, the art historian in me jumps at this and says, oh my goodness, Picasso comes out.
Well,
Or something, you mentioned ARP.
Well, ARP in other pieces, not in these so
Not
much.
in these, okay.
But, you can't avoid Picasso in the 20th century.
Sure.
But I find him so inventive, working sort of like the Africans, that you don't get caught up in an icon that you can't get away from. Like, I experimented with Henry Moore also.
Of course.
Back in the 70s and a little bit of the 80s, and I found that you can't escape him and deal with your vision, your own vision. So I got away from Henry Moore for that reason. But that doesn't happen with Picasso. Picasso frees you up.
Interesting. Now, I understand that you're self-taught as an artist.
Yes.
And which amazes me if you're working in difficult materials, but that you've also been very receptive to art history and to contemporary art around you.
I've always buried myself in reading art history. Yeah, I'm very connected with that. There's certain movements that I didn't go far into. I didn't go into surrealism or Dada or things like that.
You don't think these are surreal?
I think they could be interpreted that way, but I didn't have that philosophical attitude towards it.
I see.
I was just free.
Interesting. So given all of that, what here is Hawaii for you?
Yeah. Especially there.
That one, especially Hawaii.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And how might you articulate that? You live in Hawaii, you raised a family in Hawaii. Clearly this is a family-derived idea. The woods themselves, I think, are interesting. The ohia, of course, we hear so much about ohia now that it's threatened. That has to be a strong local pull for you.
Well, it's very disappointing that it can't save the forest. I have the trees on my property that have problems. When I started carving, it was about 1972. I was living in a very deep ohia forest in Opikau. I had leased a piece of land, an old Hawaiian man, William Kamau, an ex-sheriff and a county surveyor, had leased me 30 acres. It was actually 26 acres for $30 a year.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and that gave me a real start.
Sure.
And so I carved ohia exclusively during that period for 7 years. And I painted also at that time.
Were you casting also?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not till 84.
Uh-huh.
I started casting because of King Kalakaua.
Okay. The statue that's in Kalakaua Park, right in
Yes,
front of the
yeah.
EHCC.
I started casting because I went to Venice, California, to a foundry that the owner was someone that my mentor that I told you about, Frank Eubanks, turned me on to. So I went to that foundry, and it was a wonderful experience. We became good friends, and I stayed with him, slept in his RV, and for 3 different pieces, large pieces. I have pieces in Maui and Oahu that were also cast there. And he was so loose. He was so free with material. And that's the way I felt in what I was doing. So I felt like I could start casting my own.
I see.
Well, that was a real interruption to go into casting.
I can imagine so.
Yeah.
It's such a challenging technology.
It's very challenging. And I moved so well and so fast through it that my memory of it is difficult of getting back to some of the detail. But I have journals and so forth. But,
So do you still do wood, or are you just exclusively metal now?
Yeah, I do wood. I work using wood in different ways now. I had some ohia trees milled, and from those planks I've created pieces. And there's a show coming up at the Wailoa Center called the Abstract Show, and I'll have an ohia in there that's a different approach to how I carve using a chainsaw.
We've gone to chainsaw. Interesting.
Yeah.
Are they rougher looking, or do you polish them up like this?
No, they're rougher.
They're rougher.
Rougher. Yeah. Yeah.
I suppose working with ohia now and working with ohia then are very different intellectually, just because of the crisis.
Everything's different now. Everything's changed.
Everything's changed. Okay.
It's so much. Yeah.
Huh.
That's why these seem so archaic right now.
Well, it's interesting in the context of this show. These are by far the most traditionally finished looking pieces,
That's right.
and provide a wonderful contrast to some of the very, very rough pieces that are here.
Well, that's Andrzej's work.
That's Andrzej Kramarz, our curator, wanted to show a range of approaches to wood, and this is all very beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We've enjoyed looking at your pieces and enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you for the interview. Thank you very much.
My guest now is Lonny Tomono. Thank you so much for coming, talking about your sculpture with us. We're delighted to have you. I understand that you had your early training in California.
That's right.
At
San Francisco Art Institute.
San Francisco Art Institute and San Jose.
United States.
So was that in woodwork or was that some other medium?
All different mediums.
Okay.
You know. Yeah. It's kind of experimenting a lot. Still am.
Still am. Good, good, good. And then at some point you started working at a local Zen temple in carpentry. What made you take the jump?
I was working for an architect actually that did his own contracting, a young architect. And he was studying on the weekend with someone that brought a temple building from Kyoto for the San Francisco Zen Center.
Oh.
And re-erecting it. That's what he had come. And so he invited me over to check it out. You know? And yeah, as soon as I saw it, I wanted to learn how to do this.
Sure. So one thing leads to another, and you find yourself in the hands of one of the master carpenters in Kyoto.
Yeah.
Master temple carpenters. Oh my, what was that relationship like?
Oh, great. Well, I get emotional thinking about it.
I wonder, something like that, is there a lot of teaching, or is it more the master works and you learn from watching?
Oh yeah, it's all watching.
It's all watching.
They don't really explain anything to you. It's all about watching and, you know, and they see you're advancing and they give you more confidence. But I knew a lot, I knew some like, before I got there. You know, I knew how to use the tools, I knew how to hand plane, cut joinery. So they could use me right away. You know, like I heard all these stories about people sweeping the floor for years, but it was not that way with me. You know, it's like, get to work, do this.
So
But you know,
Huh, interesting. So this is all done with gorgeous Japanese tools.
That's right. Well, it's, you know, it's roughed out. I mean, of course, it's all milled with power tools, but then all the joints, all the connections are hand cut. And it's not sanded, it's hand cut.
Really? And it's not nailed, is it?
You know, the basic framework is not nailed. That's true. But all like some of the thinner pieces are nailed. And even in ancient times, though, they were nailed. I found one taken over some couple hundred-year-old building, but each nail was handmade. So nails were really precious back then. I think another reason why they have people on nails, because you know they have to make each nail.
Wow. That's wonderful. So let's take a look at some of your pieces here. This one always gets visitors' attention. You go la 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 la, and then they find a rock inside. What is this?
Well, a basic concept for this piece was I was turning a tree inside out.
I see. Now, are these just waste pieces, or
Right, from milling. It's a sawmill. And I'm going to snap up.
So you looked at these and you saw something to be used in it.
That's a lot of potential.
How would you explain the little rock in there? I
Oh,
don't know if you can see in the camera, but there's a rock embedded between the two pieces.
How do you notice that? Well, I guess it's like an anchor. Physically, it's an anchor. Yeah. Weighs the bottom down. And then,
I see.
kind of like population. Okay. What I get from it.
Okay.
I don't really think about these things when I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, and then it's the afterwards I kind of just
So we can call it anthropomorphic if we want to.
yeah.
That's a beautiful. This is an early one you did, you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was like what, 89 or 90.
Huh. So what? I guess it's an obvious question, but what got you doing essentially Western style sculpture using the Japanese techniques?
You know, this is something I had thought of when I was in Japan. That's what I was going to do when I got back. You know, that I was going to blend the two worlds, East and West. Yeah.
I'm intrigued by this one. Again, everybody noticed it.
That's another idea I had when I was apprenticing there. Because you know, we cut the joints out. Whenever you came across a knot, the wood would split around the knot. You know, and so I thought it would be nice to just expose all the knots
That's fascinating.
And then I thought, well, just take it back to the tree, just take it back to the sapling.
Okay. What tool are you using here?
Actually, a Japanese hand tool, a Japanese saw, which works on the pull string. A chisel, that's it.
Okay. And you just pursued right into the knots, back to the sapling.
Yeah, I just kind of, cut away so I can get the chunks out, put the handsaw, and then when I come to the, you got to be a little more careful and detailed around them.
I see.
And this was like that old, recycled piece, reclaimed piece of lumber that was from an old barn.
What is the lumber?
It's probably Douglas fir.
Douglas fir.
Yes, it's really old. Yeah, but, rather than having a new piece of wood, just you had something that was old.
Sure, you seem to like the textures.
Yeah, I did.
Uh-huh. I think I read that you actually enhance the texture sometimes with a wash.
Sometimes, but this I didn't. I just, got a wire brush and changed it up.
I see. Now tell me about the suspension. This is very striking.
That was all Andrzej, the curator's
Oh, really?
idea. I would have never thought of it.
You thought of resting on the ground?
I had it, originally I had it on a pier block, a concrete pier block.
I see.
So it would be like a post construction site.
I see.
And then Andre had this idea of suspending it, and I thought, yeah, we can try it. But it worked out beautifully. I got it, handed it to him, and give him all the credit. The shadows, the way the shadows came out. And then we were thinking about it. Then he said it has to be a branch. I said, yeah, it's got to be a branch. It can't be just a milled piece of lumber painted white.
Now, I don't usually talk about this sort of thing, but I noticed this one's not for sale. Is this personal to you?
Kind of. Yeah. I'm just a little bit too attached to it right now. I would be missing it if I I'd be the right person.
So when it goes back home, is it going to be suspended?
That's a good question. It might be. Because I like it.
Okay. How about let's take a look at the one over here in the Makai Gallery. We have our dramatically lit space back here. Oh, look at that. This is our cover art piece, actually. This is on our poster. People inevitably find it striking. Could you just talk about what is it? What were you thinking?
I wasn't thinking. That's probably why it worked out so well.
Well, that's interesting too, isn't it? Oh.
Yeah, I had this burl. I went to an old mango burl that someone gave me for a long time. And didn't know what to do with it. And I had made these teardrop pieces.
Okay,
And then I was putting them on shelves and in boxes. But then I was, plugged them after they just connected.
so you've got other teardrop pieces.
Yeah, I did.
I see. That's one thing I was wondering is, do we read as a teardrop going down, or is it something coming out of the wood? But this is a teardrop coming down.
It could be both. It could be both.
And it's set in the charcoal.
That is black sand.
Yes. Of course. To make it white.
And again,
At least to me.
I gotta give credit to Andre, because it used to be on a pedestal. It's a pedestal I made out of the same kind of wood, actually the same slabs of wood. It was a piece of mango and concrete kind of mixed together. And he had the idea of just dropping on the floor and having a circle of sand on it. And then I thought, we discussed it. I thought, that's not a bad idea. We could go for that. And then I thought, but the circle has to be, a real circle. It can't be just like feathered out into.
It would start looking like a whole new on the beach, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really striking.
So what do you get from it?
Well, I was talking with Andrzej about it the other day, and of course he was carefully non-committal, see into it what you want. I actually saw it going up. I study Islamic architecture, so I'm looking at it as some sort of a finial. And I love the contrast between the extremely smooth, regular black teardrop and the suggestive burrow. He tells me it's okay to think whatever I like about it. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah. That's what I want. I want people to have their own impression. Story. And I've heard a couple already that I would have never thought of.
I'm preparing a trip to Morocco, and so these gaunt landscapes with domes are very much on my mind right now.
I thought that too, like even like that. It was like reminding me of the Bianchini, the rock art.
Yes. Now that you say it, I didn't realize that was sand. That's going to have to looking at it differently. Sure, the moss gardens that suddenly dissolve into perfect checkerboards. And you can see islands, you can see whatever.
Right, you can see whatever.
Go out and rake it every morning. That's interesting. Let's take a look at the final piece of your exhibition. I understand this is way up to the minute.
That's true.
This is untitled. Untitled. So what are you thinking about these days?
I was kind of inspired by the older pieces. Actually, it's sort of like a similar idea. The tree emerging from a hand that won't grow. Or a machine. So that's what it was like the opposite. Which came first? Did the beam come first or did the tree come first? It's kind of what it was.
Now, did you do the cutting carpentry yourself, or is this a found piece?
Oh, I did, yeah. It was just a log. Yeah.
And what kind of log is this?
That is Portuguese cypress.
Portuguese cypress. Oh my goodness. Do we have that here in the island?
Oh, yeah. Pretty common. Something.
It's a beautiful thing. So what would you want someone to see in this?
It's a good question.
You ask me, I'll ask you.
Whatever you want, whatever comes to you is what you use.
Now I'm noticing that you've left your tooling fairly obvious.
Yeah, I just get something. I just get something to that. I like the look of the tooling, the hand tool.
What kind of tool would you use there?
Here?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a jet. It's the hand saw.
Just a second. Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Just a really rough, funny hand saw.
So all through here you're using, sounds like a kind of consistency of these beloved Japanese temple tools.
Yeah, I mean, I could be more efficient and use bar tools, but it just feels like I just sort of addicted to it.
Sure, so they're very much part of the piece.
Yeah, it's very much part of the process, for sure. Okay, like, really enjoy doing this.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, thank you so much for talking with us about these.
Well, thank you, Larry.
Enjoyed our conversation. Hi, my guest now is Patrick Sarsfield, sculptor here on the Big Island, and thank you so much.
Painter, throw that
And
painter
painter,
in, yeah.
absolutely, and I understand photographer.
No, really, those two are I'm a painter, sculptor. I love to draw, so I
Okay.
go to all the drawing classes up here because it's just fantastic.
Oh,
but I
that's great.
photograph. I have a camera, all of our almighty cameras, the cell phone. Yeah, I do, I love to photograph.
Okay, well, we have here an artist of many talents, many callings.
Yeah.
We have one piece of yours in the show here, Mater.
A long time ago. You know,
Oh,
when
my
I first
goodness.
bought my property in Volcano Village, this was in the forest
Now-
after we did some of the tree removal,
Uh-huh.
a piece of it. I didn't actually do it, but it was done, and I found it.
Okay.
So
What
it
kind of
just-
wood is it?
This ohia.
That's ohia.
Yeah. At one time, had a polished finish on it. It was, how would I say, not glossy, but it actually looked glossy, but it was more matte, between matte and glossy finish on it. And it was shown in the Volcano Arts Center. It was one of my first shows, solo shows, up at that small little gallery. But Latin language, which I love, this is mater, this is mother in English. And it has a whole feeling of motherhood, women, babies, pregnancy, everything is in it, you know, to me. Yeah.
So now you're walking through your yard and you just saw
well, it
that
wasn't,
and it struck
then it
you?
was a forest. I live in a forest. If Andrzej, you and I and a couple other people with our fingertips around some of the trees that are up there,
Oh, boy.
they'd be this big. You know, they're that sugi from Japan. There's so a huge, massive root, and then out of that, maybe, you know, 4 or 5 on the larger trees, way up 100 feet in the sky. It's incredible. I live in a very beautiful place.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Huh.
The whole island's beautiful, though.
Yeah, and of course ohia now is such a resonant concept because it's threatened. It adds another little,
All woods are.
Something.
The whole planet's threatened, you know?
well, yeah.
We gotta hang that guy Manchin. Joe Manchin. I'm getting political. But no, I don't mean that. But guys like him mess it up for everybody else.
I see. So I
And he's
see.
a Democratic politician in the United States.
Oh, the United States. Yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah.
And here in Hawaii, it seemed
that
a long way
country.
away.
Well, if we were in France or, you know, a lot of other countries, we'd have a different perspective, possibly.
Could you walk us through this?
By
Where do you-
walk you through it, it's
Where do you start?
It's heavy.
Okay.
I was amazed how Andrzej put it on the floor here. He must have adhered it somehow to the floor because it doesn't move. This is a heavy, heavy piece.
Uh-huh.
The 3 of us would probably have much trouble moving it.
I
Very
see.
dense wood over here.
Uh-huh.
So walking it through, it's just, it was there. I picked it up. I did a lot of like chiseling, small chisel, little small chisel all over it.
I see
Cleaned
the
it
tool
up.
marks, yeah.
You know, cleaned up. It was all done. I didn't carve this. This was done. This was done. Everything was done. You know, you could just feel it. Mons pubis, woman, belly, you know, pregnant, possibly, movement. You know, everything. It's even with time. This is beautiful on the top here.
I haven't looked
Just
up
this
here.
piece alone, right down on it. It's just
Oh,
fantastic.
I see. It's almost a spiral galaxy,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, beautiful. Get it from this side, Andres, and you get the plane more facing you. And everything in it in time, you know, these cracks have widened a little bit, has just given to the piece. It's explaining itself to me, you know. It's like hard for me, or not hard. It's both. It's a paradox, you know, like hard, not hard to explain. It's part of how I feel towards life.
A lot of intuition in it.
Yeah.
So where does it normally live?
Pardon me?
Where does this normally live?
Oh, here?
No, your piece.
This has been out in the forest for 20 years. You know?
So this is your personal collection now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not. It does. It's not. It hasn't been purchased.
Uh-huh.
So it's still with me, like a lot of my work.
Uh-huh.
You know, I don't want to mention other, but Picasso was to me so amazing because he didn't really like to sell any of his work. No, he really didn't. You know?
I believe
and
that.
he had these huge warehouses in France that he would go visit and hang out in, stay, drink his wine or whatever, take his ladies, you know, and friends.
Uh-huh.
And he would see them every year. I'm kind of like that. Well, I don't have I have my one beautiful big studio and I love living there. I like the forest. Yeah.
Now, you also paint.
Yeah.
Tell us about your painting.
My paintings are basically color, and they're the same thing. They're feeling paintings. For many years, I did specifically, you know, women, men, a lot of nudity, and I don't do that anymore. What I do now only, solely, is colors and feelings. You know how somebody might take a canvas out and say, close your eyes. You know, touch down here and get your bearings for this painting you're going to paint, blind, or as if you were blind. Close your eyes, and if you want, we can put like a bandana on your eyes and paint the painting like that.
So they're
You
abstraction.
never know what's going to come out. Like if you're up on a 10-foot painting and you're dripping different colors, like an enamel paint that stays wet for 24 hours, the painters intermingle and do things that you could never do if you intended to do. I like to paint like that. I like to throw stuff on painting. I like to put it flat and get up on a huge ladder, way down, it's like 10 or 15 feet down there, and paint it. You know?
So you like the
It's
natural
like
way things.
there was a fellow in here, he's, I think he's been going around the world having tours. Remember that guy, Andrzej? That he had a layout over here, you could come down to the gallery and paint with him, be part of it. He had a show in here. And his paintings were feeling paint, what I call feeling paintings. They're not specific, there's no concept that you're going off of a predetermined design. You're just going from your brain to your body to the canvas with feelings. Everything emanates. So those kind of paintings I love to do.
And you're doing woodworking still?
Yeah, I do everything still.
What?
Right now I'm doing my garden.
Okay.
Taking all the surface off. Yeah, I want to go past this huge tree. But my dilemma is, what about some of those massive roots are going to come? And I cut one or two. These trees are 100 feet high, two coming off a massive, like I told you, huge. So I don't know. I've got to hit the internet, man. And get, that's the only place you can find out all that information.
Sure.
So I got to do that.
So the woodworking you're doing now, is it similar to this, finding a piece and doing just sort of minimal interventions, or are you doing more other things?
What I'm doing right now is basically, at 85, I'm 85 now, I'm cleaning up my studio, which I haven't done. I did my knees. I was playing soccer at 81. And I did my knees. I wanted to continue because bone on bone pain. Didn't quite work out with the right one. I did both knees. So I've been kind of like recovering, and also I'm fixing up my studio again for the last run. I'm not going to be doing it again.
I wonder, tell me what it was like working with our curator, Andrzej, who's also, by the way, doing the filming.
Tell me about it.
What was it like working with Andrzej, the curator of the show?
Oh, he's fantastic. We're so lucky to have this man in the islands, out here in the middle of the Pacific. It's incredible. He could be at MoMA, right? It's a guy that runs those 3 major galleries in Great Britain. One is the big one, the most exhibited gallery in the world. Andrzej could do the same thing.
Oh my!
And he's here, and we're so lucky to have him. Like I told you before, he's the only, in my whole life, and I've been doing this all my life, San Francisco, Maui, different islands, and over here, that he's the only director that's ever sought me out and come and visited me in my studio to see what I'm doing. The only one. What does that tell you?
And he picked and he chose, or
he picked these shows. I had a couple other pieces that I liked, but he chose this one. And then when I came in here, I came in from this entrance over here, and there wasn't this in between. It's the columns.
Yeah.
And I saw it was perfect. The placement.
Great.
From my piece in this show that's so well curated is perfect.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's
to
because
hear.
of Andrzej, Kramarz, or the great one. And truly, he's one of the great ones in the art world today. Anywhere.
I see. Well, it's an interesting anchor for the whole show, isn't it? I think his idea was to show all sorts of different approaches to working with wood, and this is, I think, the most hands-off? The more that's about
I don't know, I've
the
had
vision?
some of my friends like it, they've never seen it before. It was done when I first got over to the islands. I had that show, that first show was in, I got here in 88. I think that was, I had a show here in 92, my first show on the island of Hawaii. And that show at the Art Center in the National Park was a couple of years before. I don't quite remember.
So clearly your work like this at least, is so rooted, literally and figuratively, in the island of Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That and my religion. I do a lot of work. I told a lot of my fellow artists, for wherever they came from, to do work that kind of explains what might be problematical for them, the country they live in, their background. Yeah, I'm a Roman Catholic, Irishman, full-blooded, and our people have had a lot of trouble for 800 years because of Great Britain. You know, probably of the countries in the world today that have caused the most trouble. You have to lay it at the lap of the British.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
So how would this fit into that?
This doesn't.
This doesn't?
This is just my feeling,
Okay.
my life. It fits in my life as an artist, trying to represent nature, myself as an artist, for people to look at. I'm kind of like an artist of the common people. I believe that, you know. I mean, like I would love to have like this place seen more. You know, this is the only thing we have on this side of the island, probably the whole island. And then we have the East Hawaii Cultural Center. I mean, excuse me, that's here. What we have on Maui is the Maui Art.
Right.
And also the Schaefer Gallery. That's the only gallery in this state. The only one. I mean, made specifically for showing artwork. It's a fantastic gallery. This gallery has in recent times, because of Stephen Friedman, a lot of it is his influence, has turned it into a fantastic little gallery. The windows are closed like they used to be open. It was more homey and non-existent. It didn't work. Now it works.
It works.
And you have to give that man the credit for that.
Oh, we're so glad to have you participate in that.
I've been here for years. I've had a lot of solo shows here.
Great.
You know, and the place is special to me.
Oh, that's
You know,
nice
like
to
the Iron Gate, I did that a long time ago. And
That's yours?
There's a bar upstairs.
Ah,
When
okay.
Suda was director here, and she wanted to have the elevator she put in, but she wanted to have a restaurant upstairs. Didn't happen, but it was a dream, you know, for this place. But it's gone through a lot of transformation in the years since the architect that did my house helped do this place. I can't think of his name right now.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's.
No, that's our director.
Well, I'm delighted that you're continuing to participate with us here in this beautiful, fascinating work and this fascinating show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
One of our artists, Randy Takaki, sadly can't be with us today because he died 6 years ago. He was a close friend of the East Hawaii Cultural Center, and so the chairman of our board, Steve Friedman, has kindly come in to help us talk about his artwork that's in the show. And thank you so much for coming, Steve.
Pleasure.
Oh, let's take a look at this beautiful piece here, which Andrzej has put by the door, so it's the first thing people see. Now, I've never met Randy, so I'm innocent. I walk up, I say, oh, it looks like a driftwood or a root maybe. I wonder what the artist has done with it. Steve, what do you suppose he's done with it?
That's actually a good question, because Randy did it pretty much as little as he could with most of the pieces. The origins of Randy's work kind of explain that. Randy's work began with a traumatic event, actually. It was the loss of his child and during childbirth. And he showed me a painting he had done at the time, which involved all of the people in the room and behind a large gray column, which he identified as a guardian. He began to see these all over the place, and he would just find objects which represented the figure and remove what he needed to reveal the figure, as it were. And this is typical of the kind of thing you do with a piece of driftwood, and just enough work around the head to reveal the figure.
So it's not just found objects, they are in fact carefully worked.
Everyone was touched.
Oh, that's interesting. This is such a sad story. Did he do other things, or was it just this wood from then on?
No, he worked with a number of media, but it was always the same figure. Something interestingly that made him relatively unpopular as an artist in Hilo because his entertainment value was fairly low. But his quality and the character of his creativity was extremely high. And as an artist coming to Hawaii and finding somebody with his focus and perspective in a small community like this was extraordinary.
Now, you also hosted an exhibit or two maybe of his at your own gallery, the Id Space.
Yeah.
So you're very closely connected with his work.
Yeah, Randy was a friend of mine for many years, and he did some very curious exhibitions, yeah.
I see.
He came to my gallery, and he came to me 3 days before the exhibition and said, "I'm canceling." And I said, "Okay," because my gallery is very casual.
All right.
And he came the day before and put one very small piece in the corner and said, "I'm done." And I said, "Okay." Then he put one piece in the middle of the room, facing it, and said he was finished. Finally, the night before the show, he removed all the doors and windows from the gallery.
Oh my goodness.
And the opening was the next morning. And I went to bed. Randy stayed up all night, and it opened the next day with a normal exhibition of beautiful works that he always did. So that's very typical of Randy's relationship to his process.
Okay. Oh, that's fascinating. Now, he also had, what, a show or two here previous to this?
He definitely had at least 2 or 3 solo exhibitions here over the 40 years he was an installer here.
40 years he was working with us. Oh, that's
Randy
really
was a very
interesting.
gifted installer.
I've heard this from some of the other artists I've interviewed,
Yeah.
that he was. Let's take a look at some more of his pieces here.
Sure.
These seem to be more typical of what Andrzej's chosen to show. They're quite small. Here's my hand for scale. And again, it looks like, from a distance, they look like found objects, but then when we get close, they are worked, they are textured, they're different shapes, each one has a head. What do you see when you look at these?
Well, there's a historical tradition, I imagine you know from your expertise in Southeast Asia, with guardian figures around temples. And I think Randy had some influence from that. He spent some time in Japan. And he decided he was going to make, I don't exactly remember the number, but 5,000 or 6,000 of these figures. At the time I asked him, he had already done 1,000 or 2,000. And so he did some tiny like this, some 7 feet tall. And he had thousands of pieces of wood lying around. Anything he found that suggested to him a figure, he would have it lying around his studio until he felt something, and then he would begin. Referencing the small pieces, when I first came, I still had association with some major galleries, and I wanted to introduce him to a gallery, and I brought in a curator from the mainland. And when I arrived, Randy was in his truck and said he'd be up in a minute, and he looked like he was playing with something in his lap. And I didn't know what he was doing, it seemed strange. And I came upstairs, and he finally arrived. I'm there with the curator, and he said, he hands the curator a piece that he's just whittled out of a small piece of wood. And so the curator's fascinated and said, "I'd love to see your work." And Randy said, "You already have." And he wouldn't take him to his studio, wouldn't show him anything more. That was it. He was done.
My goodness. Okay,
So there were hundreds of these.
Does sound difficult. Yeah, I guess my first association with these guys, I don't know if you know the Mijikando funerary monuments from East Africa, which are tall wooden things with a head on top, which have become infamous recently because they're stolen almost as soon as they're put in the graveyard.
Wow.
I'm wondering, did he place them, or were they strictly in the studio?
It was important for him to have them all over the place. He did installations in the forest. He wanted people to have them. They were everywhere.
I see. Oh. Let's take a look over here. Andrzej's done something interesting with the gallery. There's low lighting, and he's spotlighted a number of the pieces he found most interesting. And I think he's going to go show us up close.
Yeah, this was interesting because I spent quite a bit of time in Randy's studio in the forest. And the pieces felt like this in his studio. It was a barn in the middle of a camellia garden in the forest, and the pieces were lowly illuminated. He had no real lighting in his studio. And each one glowed in the way these pieces did. I think this installation really reflects the way Randy thought of his work, despite the fact that I don't think Andrzej ever went to that studio. I'm not sure.
Huh. So this is serendipitous.
I don't think serendipitous. I think Andrzej had a feeling for what Randy's work was relating to.
I see. Well, what he's filming now, he just showed me, we're looking at all sorts of different things. We're looking at driftwood, we're looking at bark, we're looking at combinations of bark and stripped wood, and each one has that little head, and some of them actually have something like a face. And I understand that he was quite meticulous in these things. It's not just a lump, it's okay to imagine them anthropomorphically because they are anthropomorphic. That's what I'm understanding.
Yeah, he was very, very detailed, and he struggled and suffered over each piece.
Did he really?
Yeah, sometimes he'd spend months. I had a piece that he asked me early on when I met him if there was a piece I would like because he wanted to give me a piece. I pointed at one, he said, "It's not finished." Over the next 10 years, he asked me each year if there was one I wanted, and I pointed at the same piece, which looked quite finished to me. He said it wasn't finished. 10 years later, he finally chose to give me that piece. And interestingly, as we were carrying it upstairs to my house, a little tiny chip snapped off, and he said, "Now it's done."
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Huh. Let's take a look at one of the larger pieces. I guess the largest piece of his in our show. It's over here.
That's actually an interesting piece. That's, I think, a relatively early piece.
Okay. And again, I wasn't sure at first glance whether it was found or whether there was an intervention, but I see now that it's been carved around the top.
Well, what is interesting about his early work, he said when he first began to see these guardian figures, he would see them as a shadow on a wall. He said the first one he saw was in a barn door, and he saw the shadow, and then he went and painted the shadow. Then he would find rusted pieces of metal, old pieces of wood. This quite likely is an early piece that was of that nature, where he'd find the object almost as if it was there in spirit and just present it. So a lot of the early works were crumpled wire, pieces of metal, other minimalist objects, barely adjusted to reflect the figure.
So he didn't add the nail or anything like that. These are things that appealed to him with that already.
Randy didn't add anything. He reduced. His process was pretty much exclusively reductive.
Now, isn't that interesting? We've had a couple of our other artists talk that way as well. But,
he did do some works in clay, and those were not the same process. But almost all of his work was done by reductive processes.
Isn't that interesting? Now that you mentioned the shadow, I can see that as a shadow, or I can see that evolving from a shadow idea.
Randy had some very extreme spiritual beliefs, and they mixed in with his art and his family life, and this was a part of there was a lot of mysticism involved in his beliefs around his pieces.
Interesting. Would they come under any heading, or they're just unique to him?
I think he had some Buddhist influences. He spent time in Japan involved with Buddhism, but he had a lot of animistic beliefs as well. I'm not entirely clear on all of them, but it was his own construction, I think.
Oh, that's really fascinating. So how long did he spend, do you think? How many years doing these?
He told me that the events that incited his career began while he was working in Sears, I believe it was, as a installer of departments.
Uh-huh.
And when his child died, he just made a decision. He felt so helpless, he said. He made a decision, he left his family, and he moved into his studio and began doing these pieces. So I guess it was, I knew him for 25 years or so it was substantially before that. So I think he was in his 20s. He had a couple of children, and then he spent the rest of his life doing it. Wow. Never stopped.
This calls to mind so many stories of monastic heroes.
Yep.
And
Very
specifically Japanese monastic heroes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
He lost a lot, he sacrificed a lot, but he wouldn't stop, and he had no doubts ever about what he was doing, at least in my experience.
Huh. Well, thank you so much. That's so enlightening. And I know that the strength of the show, amongst other things, is the extraordinary variety of approaches to wood, and this is certainly different from everyone else's.
Randy was an extraordinary man.